Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and today we're going to be talking about whether Breath of the Wild 2 will show up in the next big Nintendo Direct. And when we talk about the next big Nintendo Direct, we're assuming there's going to be a Nintendo Direct this June like there usually is for E3. E3 is cancelled this year, but we're still predicting that there will be a big Direct this June for the big summer show. So assuming that's actually the case, will Nintendo finally give us some real details on Breath of the Wild 2? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Now before we jump into things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And then of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe or perhaps consider joining as a member. So since Nintendo initially revealed this game back at E3 2019, they've been fairly quiet. We had that initial trailer, then we waited 2 whole years to get another trailer at E3 2021. And by that point, once they give us that second trailer, there's this thought process that Nintendo was finally ready to lift the lid off this game, trickling out details as we would approach the release that was hopefully not too far off. But what has happened since? Well, the September Direct came around, it wasn't there. The Game Awards came around, which historically has had Breath of the Wild, it wasn't there. The February Nintendo Direct came around, it was not there, and then not too long ago, Nintendo provided a development update on Breath of the Wild 2, and they told us that the game wouldn't be coming out until spring 2023. They did give us a little bit more footage there, just a few extra seconds, and that's pretty much it. Nintendo's been fairly quiet about this game, and they've pushed up this game. It's actually taken a very long time to be made. We know they started development on this project back at the end of 2017, so given that we're now in 2022 and then it's a sequel using Breath of the Wild as a foundation, there's been a lot of work and time going into this game, and yet we know so little. Yet supposedly it's coming out spring 2023, which isn't that far off. Which begs the question, when will Nintendo finally start giving us some serious details about this game? When will we see footage? When will we have an actual working understanding of the entire concept and gameplay loop of this game? If we go off historical precedents, E3 makes tons of sense. That's usually when Nintendo gives us the big details on the next big Zelda. I mean, the last 2 trailers for Breath of the Wild 2, the only 2 full-length trailers for Breath of the Wild 2 have come at E3. Breath of the Wild, its full gameplay was revealed at E3. Twilight Princess, same deal. It has been like that for previous Zeldas as well. But with E3 being cancelled, that does sort of change the discussion a little bit, right? Because, well, there's no pattern to follow because E3 is cancelled. However, most are thinking, myself included, that there still will be a Nintendo Direct around the E3 time that will mostly serve pretty much the same purpose it always has, it just won't have the E3 branding. So with that in mind, if Nintendo's perspective is that this Nintendo Direct will basically be the big summer show that they usually have, then maybe they still will be willing to show off Breath of the Wild 2, similar to the way they showed off previous Zeldas. But from that perspective alone, it's possible they don't, because Nintendo might not think of this Direct as they have previous summer shows. I'm thinking they will, because ultimately it should still serve the same purpose, but it might not. And for the sake of this discussion, let's just assume that the spring 2023 timing is the timing and there will be no further delays. It might be delayed again because it is Zelda, and after being burned so many times with expecting Breath of the Wild 2 sooner than later, I've now just accepted the eternal possibility that yes, at any point Breath of the Wild or any big Zelda game could be delayed further. So that could happen, but again, for the sake of this discussion, let's assume it will not be, and it'll be coming out March 2023, which is usually what spring tends to suggest. When would be a good time to blow the lid off this game? If we go off how Nintendo treated the initial Breath of the Wild, E3, or summer, before that spring release, makes the most sense. That's how they did it then. Back at E3 2016, the only game Nintendo had for their entire show was Breath of the Wild, and they showed a whole bunch of the game, and it was amazing. Then in that holiday, they announced the Nintendo Switch, and they showed off Breath of the Wild running on that system. Then in January, we had another trailer of the game, and then it came out in March alongside the Switch. Could Breath of the Wild 2 be following a similar pattern? Will Breath of the Wild 2 have a big focus on the show? They'll reveal new hardware perhaps late this year or early next year, and they'll release alongside each other this March. There is that possibility. But another thing to consider here is that there might not be new hardware, or if it is, it may not really be anything of significance that changes things too much around. And also, there are so many other games that are coming out right now that Nintendo can focus on. It's not like 2016 where all they had was Breath of the Wild. At the time, the Wii was completely dead. They were getting ready to transition to their next system. And while Nintendo may still be getting ready to transition to their next system, they have so many games coming out and that will be coming out and that will be relevant for years to come, unlike their situation back on the Wii U in 2016. So if Nintendo had nothing else, then yeah, they probably would show off Breath of the Wild 2, just to keep themselves in the discussion and to remind fans that they have something that works, so they save some of their money for Nintendo when the holidays come around. So you can argue it was far more important for Nintendo to showcase Breath of the Wild 9 months before its release at E3 2016, and with Breath of the Wild 2, Nintendo can probably get away with not showing off this game in its full glory 9 months before its release this year. So when you look at it in that way, the chances of Breath of the Wild 2 showing up at the next Direct are far less likely than for Breath of the Wild back in 2016. But just because the chances are lower doesn't mean there aren't chances, doesn't mean Nintendo still won't do it. They're gonna showcase a lot of games, and Nintendo knows that we want Zelda, we want to see Zelda. They should give us some sort of Zelda release almost every single year, and we still don't know what that's gonna be for this calendar year, if anything. But in my opinion, I think it's pretty likely that Zelda will be mentioned in the next Direct. With Breath of the Wild 2 being the big release for early next year, I feel like it'll be weird for Nintendo to not even mention it. And even if they don't have a big plan to show it off in a lot of detail, they're probably still going to announce something Zelda for this calendar year. And if they do that, they probably still need to give us something on Breath of the Wild 2, at the very least saying, for like the 5th or 4th time, that development is going well. So, if I had to place my money, my bets, I would say with above 90% certainty that Breath of the Wild 2 will be mentioned in some capacity in the next big Direct that's coming hopefully this June. Now, the odds of it being more than just a mention, I also think are still fairly high. The summer Direct time is usually when Nintendo likes to give us a whole bunch of treehouse footage for some of their biggest upcoming games, and this would be a great opportunity to finally showcase Breath of the Wild 2. So I still think there's a pretty good chance they do that. However, when we have things like Splatoon 3, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Bayonetta 3, Mario Rabbids with Sparks of Hope, and whatever else Nintendo has planned for the rest of the year, they don't need to show it off. They have plenty of games to show and talk about. So it's also possible that even if they do give us some Breath of the Wild 2 information, they may not fully blow the lid off the game because they want to focus on other things until a little bit later. And if that's the case, there is still plenty of time in the year for Nintendo to, for example, have like a huge Breath of the Wild 2 Direct to fully showcase this game and let us know what it's all about. And it doesn't have to happen at E3, it could even happen in a September Direct or beyond. So Nintendo could decide to not show off Breath of the Wild 2. But, in my opinion, I think it makes more sense to show it off. I think it would be a mistake for Nintendo to not showcase this game, considering how we've been lacking information on this game for so long. I think they're risking impacting the anticipation for this game to some extent. I think if we go through a big summer showcase, the E3 replacement Direct, without any serious mention of Breath of the Wild 2, there's going to be a fair bit of disappointment and disheartening, and there may even be some doubt amongst fans that this game is even going to be good. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that the game is going to be bad or anything of that sort, but I do feel like it would probably be a better message to show off Breath of the Wild 2 in some healthy capacity. I'm not saying you have to give us a full hour of gameplay or even 30 minutes, but at least another trailer. Or perhaps a smaller segment just showing that this game is doing well, giving us some details, giving us a real reason to anticipate this project. So if I had to make a prediction, I will predict that we will not just get a mention for Breath of the Wild 2, but we will learn more about this game, we will get more gameplay, and maybe we finally get a title reveal. That's what I think is going to happen, but what do you guys think? Do you guys think Breath of the Wild 2 will show up in a June Nintendo Direct? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.